All right. We will get going here for the sake of time. It is good seeing everyone tonight. If folks log on in the middle, they log on in the middle and then they can watch the recording. The chat might be a little hard for me to track with sharing the screen and everything. So as we go through things, if you have a question, we can have questions at the end of each slide to make sure we understand that slide. If you want this PowerPoint, I'm totally fine with sharing it. Just shoot me a message and I can email it to you. I just ask, like, if you want to share it with others or whatever, just let me know. I'm more than happy to do a presentation for other groups and things like that. I know Chris and I are collaborating a little this spring with the Valley Shore Y, so I'm more than happy to like donate some time and do that for a group. I'd rather do that than just like someone taking my stuff. Not that I think any of you will do that, but here we are. So we'll take the first 30 minutes or so to go over bike parts, names of the parts in our bikes, what they do. Some will go into a little detail. I mean, obviously, I think we could spend all day talking about how our bike works, but just trying to understand the basics for when we go into a bike shop. We know what to say. We don't have to call it thingies and bits and things like that, like I tend to do. So we can go in with a little more knowledge, understand what these parts do, help in conversations at the bike shop, so on and so forth. Then after that's over, we wrap that up. I'm just going to leave some time for people to ask questions about anything going on with Women on Wheels, anything about your bike, me, races, whatever. I'll answer the best I can. I'm obviously not an expert in all this stuff, but I figured I could share my knowledge with what I know. So that's my spiel. Looks like we got a good number of folks on, which is exciting. So let's get started. Okay, so we're going to start with the frame. Pretty straightforward with this. We've got our top tube up here. On our top tube, it is a common area to put bags and things like that for our bike packing folks, or to put a little bento box or something to hold nutrition. We see that on tri bikes. We see that on gravel bikes, things like that. Then we've got our seat tube. So that's connecting the seat to the bottom bracket area. You can see that. We'll get into those parts in a bit. Then we have our down tube. So the top tube, down tube, and seat tube, sometimes people refer this as a triangle of the bicycle. Obviously, our down tube and seat tube is where our most common bottle holders go. We can also put bags and things like that in the triangle of the bike. So again, bike packing folks, you might hear people refer to like, oh, this is like a triangle frame bag or something. That's what they're referring to. We've got our head tube and our fork up front here. The head tube connects the handlebars to the wheel. It also contains the steerer, which allows us to turn our bike. There's lots of components within these things. I think for our basic 101 knowledge, we don't need to know. Obviously, if you want to become a mechanic or something, that becomes more important. And in the back, we have the seat stays and the chain stays. So the chain stays connects the bottom bracket to the wheels. Again, we're going to get into this bottom bracket piece in a bit, but it connects those two things. And then the seat stay will connect that seat to the wheels. And then not highlighted, but we have our seat post is up here and our saddle, which we're probably familiar with those things. All right. We have any questions so far? Or comments? If you want to have something to add, feel free to do that too. Okay. Then we get into handlebars. So there's a variety of different types of handlebars. If you're newer to riding, you know, you'll hear us talk about this a lot. Like, oh, are you looking for like a straight bar or a drop bar bike, right? So our drop bars are our typical road bikes. They are also our gravel bikes. A road and gravel bike look very familiar. If you don't know all the ins and outs of what you're looking at, their frame and their handlebars will look the same. Straight bars we see on our mountain bikes and our hybrid bikes. hybrid bikes, those tend to be a little more upright. The straight handlebars allow that to happen a little bit better. And then we have our aero bars all the way to the right here. Those are triathlon and time trial bikes. These triathlon setups can get quite complex. We call this the cockpit of the bike, and that can get pretty intense with fittings and customization and things like that. But if you see something with aero bars, you're looking at a triathlon bike. And if you don't do triathlons or time trials, you really have zero reason to own a triathlon bike. So it's the basics of handlebars. Obviously, on all of our handlebars here, we've got brakes. So the drop bars are there, the straight bars. You can see on the right below the grips there. The aero bars get a little more complex. So when you're sitting in those pads, usually we can shift on those bars, and then we have to get out of those bars to brake. And you can see the brakes on there when you're up out of aero and sitting a little more upright. So a little more complex again with those aero bars. All right, handlebar questions. All right. Wheels. We obviously. Oh, go ahead.
Sorry, this is Kristen.
Hey.
Hi, I'm making dinner. Question about the, because as you know, I'm training for the triathlon, but I do not have a tri bike whatsoever. How important are those? Like I don't need to worry about that, right? Like for my first triathlon. Okay, great.
No, for your first triathlon, don't worry at all. Any bike that pedals and rolls is good to go.
Great.
I would say triathlon bikes become a lot more important once you get into that 70.3 and 100.6 distance, because they can be more comfortable over those longer durations. Yes, they're faster and all that good stuff, but if you're just doing triathlon to participate in triathlon and have fun and try something new, ride whatever you have.
Okay.
If you want to start winning your age group and going longer and longer and you become dedicated, then it's best to talk about a tri bike or clip-on aero bars and things like that. For your first one, don't stress. You're welcome. You. Any other questions? Okay, so now we're getting into wheels. We obviously all know our wheels. Our bike comes with a stock set of wheels. If you've been in the sport for a little bit, you can hear people start talking about carbon this, carbon that, carbon whatever, right? So wheels get into carbon as well. So you can see in this picture on the top right, that wheel on the left is going to be our carbon wheel, and the wheel on the right is going to be an aluminum wheel. So you can tell because your carbon wheels are going to have this like thicker part, which we call like the dish, like the deeper the dish of the wheel. So that's just the two comparisons. It's usually pretty obvious if you're like looking at wheels, which ones are carbon or not. I mean, especially those ones like serious race wheels can have quite a deep dish, or the full disc wheel. If you're into triathlons and things like that, you've probably seen those. So within the wheels, we've got the hub right in the middle. I'll talk about more of that in a second. We have the spokes. At the end of the spokes, they call those the nipples. Oh, everyone always thinks that's funny, but that's what it's called. And then we've got our valve, which is how we pump up our wheels or tires. And then we've got our rim and then our actual tire. So those are the parts of the wheel. Hubs on our wheels, those things have bearings in them. Those bearings can wear and replace and need replacement. If those bearings are wearing, the wheel's going to feel like it's moving slower and it's a lot less smooth. So bearings help things spin smoothly. And if we are like the bearings in our hubs need to be replaced, everything is just going to feel like a little sticky with that. So that's my little spiel about hubs. Does anyone have questions about hubs? Okay. Something that if you go get your bike tuned up or whatever, they should be checking those things for you. Getting into a little more with carbon versus aluminum wheels. So aluminum is what most of your bikes come with, unless you're buying a really top end bike. It would probably come with like a starter carbon wheel, something not with a crazy deep dish. So carbon wheels are lighter and they're pretty stiff. So they improve acceleration and handling. They're more expensive. And then they have various depths, as I was saying before. Our aluminum wheels is what comes with the majority of our bikes. They tend to be a little heavier. Some, like, they're more durable in theory, but new age carbon wheels are quite durable as well. And aluminum wheels are more affordable. So usually the wheels that come with your bike are totally fine. If you're getting into racing, it's common to buy a second set of wheels to have like a race set of wheels. Or if you have a gravel bike, you can have a couple sets of wheels with different treads of tires. Or if you have a cool new road bike that can also serve as a gravel bike, it's common to have, a slick set of road wheels and then a second gravel set of wheels. And then wheel size. So that's something that maybe we don't know a ton about. But the wheel size is going to depend on the bike. So when we're talking about road bikes and gravel bikes, we're usually talking about a 700C wheel. Sometimes you hear people throw around 650B. Definitely not as common, and would be something that would be pretty specific when you buy a wheel. And then when we talk about like mountain bike wheels, we've got all sorts of sizes, 26, 27.5, 29er. So that's when people are talking about, you hear that in mountain bikes a lot, right? Oh, it's a 29er, right? It's a 29-inch wheel. When you're buying like a tire or a tube or something, it would say like 700 by 25. So it's the size of the wheel by how wide your tire is. So questions about that?
So can you put different size width tires on the same size wheel?
That's a great question. Yes. So, yes, to an extent, right? You can't put like a road tire on like a mountain bike wheel, right? But if we're in the same family of bikes, right? So if you got a gravel bike, for example, right? Disc brakes, good wide frame, right? You can fit definitely wider tires into that. So maybe you have a road bike that serves as a gravel bike, you have a 700 by 28 for your road tire, and then you're going up to a 35 for your gravel tire. So yes, you can do that. Most wheels should accommodate like a range, and then if you're like purchasing a second set of wheels like through a shop or something, right, you can talk to them about it too to make sure it's working.
Okay, thanks.
But usually, Karen, where that becomes an issue is the frame of the bike. So for example, my like cyclocross bike, I can just barely squeeze like a 35 into that thing, right? It's meant for a 33C tire. So the frame gets in the way, not necessarily the wheel, if that makes sense. All right, any other questions? Okay. Brakes. I have a few slides on brakes, kind of depending on what you're riding here. The most common thing we're seeing this day and age is disc brakes versus rim brakes. Disc brakes are on the left, rim brakes are on the right. Now, if you have some older bikes, totally fine. We've just got some different style of brakes. So disc brakes were historically more common on off-road, gravel bikes, mountain bikes, things of that nature, but now we're seeing them a lot on road bikes. Old school mentality, disc brakes are heavier, and we're on this light aero road bike. We don't want these heavy disc brakes. New school mentality is like, oh, the minuscule bit of weight that the disc brakes are, they have better stopping power. So you can brake less, you can brake later into turns. You don't need to brake as hard because it brakes better. So you're seeing a lot of road bikes now with disc brakes. So if you're buying like an entry-level hybrid bike, that may not necessarily have disc brakes depending on what you're looking at, but definitely the higher and higher models are going to start implementing those. Then we've got the V brakes. So some older model hybrid type bikes may have these. There's a cable that runs from one side of the brake across the top. You can see that little bit here, and then it squeezes the two pads together. These are the brakes where you have to like pull that top on part out when you need to take off the wheel, and then make sure you clip it back on so your bike actually brakes when you need it to. So if you have an older bike and you've taken the wheel on and off, you might be familiar with that V brake. It's definitely still around. The caliper brakes is what we're seeing today as our rim brake. So similar to that V brake style, we've just got rid of the mechanism that like pops in and out. Now it's all in that little fancy bit up top. And then cantilever brakes are very old school. I would be surprised if someone has a bike that has this, but if you're buying a new bike, it's definitely not going to have these. So those have like two completely separate brake arms. They're not attached together at all. They've got these cables that run, you know, quite a ways, and they pull the brakes together. So most of you don't have that, I'm guessing, but some people still talk about it. If you get someone talking about bikes that's been riding bikes for a long time. So, like I said, disc brakes more and more common. We like them because they stop in all weather. It can be raining, it can be snowing, there can be salt, dirt, whatever on the road. And that brake is going to brake the same every time. Our rim brakes are a little harder. If it's raining, you need to brake earlier to make sure it actually stops. If you've got rim brakes on carbon wheels, you want to brake for a long time. The bike is barely going to slow down on those carbon wheels with rim brakes. It stops eventually, but you got to definitely prepare ahead. So disc brakes, definitely a different feel, but I'm going to say worth it on any style of bike. Questions? Cruising right along here. Okay. Drivetrain. So this is where things get complicated, and my guess is probably why a lot of you are here to learn a little more about this stuff. So this is going to be an overview, and then the next few slides are going to explain some of this stuff more. So we've got in the middle, can you guys see my little cursor? Yeah, okay. So we're going to have our bottom bracket in here. These things attached to that are going to be our crank arms, which is what our pedals attach to. Then we have, this is a cassette, and back here is a cassette. All right, front derailleur, rear derailleur. So they look different, even though they're both called derailleur of some form or fashion. Obviously, we know about our chain. All right, so this is an overview. Now we're going to dive into it. So derailleurs help our bike shift from chainring to chainring is the overview of what they do. If you have a one by up front, right? So there's just one chainring up front. Obviously, you don't need something to move that, but then you're still going to have your rear derailleur there. Cassettes, those have the multiple different sizes of them, as we saw in the picture. Those cassettes come in all sorts of ranges. We're going to touch briefly on what that means. At some point, I hope to have a whole PowerPoint about cassettes and shifting and what it all means, because it's very complicated if you're trying to learn about it. So cassettes come in a wide range. A lot of it is going to depend on what the bike is for, what the range of cassette's going to be. But the size of the cassette is expressed by quoting its smallest and largest cogs. So those are the cassettes, the whole thing, and then there's multiple cogs within that. So a modern road bike cassette may be 11 by 32. So that's going to give you 11 cogs, 11 little teeth on each of like the one cog, and then 32 teeth on the other cog. So we'll get into that a little more too. Okay, your front cassette can be a 1 by, 2 by, or 3 by, which is referring to the number of those chain rings that we have. Front cassette's pretty straightforward. 1, 2, or 3. The rear cassette is where things go awry. It gets really complicated. So the gears on the rear wheel, the cassette are the cogs. The cogs have the teeth, right? So those little pointy things are what we call the teeth. All right, questions before we get into measuring cassettes. This is another picture here of a little more detail of the derailleur. I wouldn't stress knowing all the ins and outs per se of your derailleur. It's a tricky little piece on the bike, and if you don't know what you're doing, I wouldn't be poking at the tension screws and the limit screws and the barrel adjuster and all of that. This is what shifts your bike appropriately. It's a lot of like fine tuning that goes into it. Really easy for a tech at a shop to quickly do. It looks like they're doing nothing and they move a few little things and your bike's shifting perfect again. If we would try to do that, Jesus, take the wheel. Right? So the rear derailleur is definitely more complicated. Unless you have some experience. Touch it. The one good thing to know though is the derailleur hanger. So if you fly with your bike at all, a lot of people will talk about how to properly fly, removing the derailleur, things like that. The derailleur hanger is the thing that's most likely to snap in travel, and it's very common to travel with an extra hanger that's specific to your bike. They're usually not too expensive. I'm getting one for my new gravel bike for my next trip, and it's like $40 or something. So if you do fly with your bike, talk to me. I can tell you what I've learned. You want a new derailleur hanger to take just in case. Okay, so measuring cassette. So again, this is talking, we can talk about like the front cassette too. There's measurements that go into that, but I would say a lot of people talk about the rear cassette. So your stock bike is going to come with what you need, right? That bike, if this bike's designed as a climbing road bike, it's going to come with a cassette for that. If it's designed as a mountain bike, it's going to come as a cassette for that, right? The more and more you get into these things, or you're signing up for big races, have big goals, things like that, that's when we may start caring about what we've got for gears and things like that. The example I like to use is I raced out in Oceanside, California, and I was doing Lake Placid. I had a bunch of hilly races, Chattanooga, right? There was some climby type races. So for that like year and a half, I was like, you know what, with what I've got on the calendar, I'm going to get a wider range in the back. So that's going to give me more climbing gears and more descending gears. So something like that, I decided to upgrade. But again, I had been doing triathlon for 8 years before I started messing with that stuff. If you're building a bike from the bottom up, if you've got a frame and you're building it, you're going to have to pick what you want for a cassette. So that's what I just did for my gravel bike. I definitely got assistance with that because I didn't have much of an opinion, and told Chris at Body Over Bike what I wanted to do. And he was like, this is what you want. And I was like, perfect. Put it on my bike, please. So people can help with this if you want upgrades or to swap things. But I thought it would be important for us to know that, just some basics of it, especially when you hear people talking about it. So the number of speeds your bike has in the back and in the front, right, is the number of cogs, right? So a lot of times we'll have like 11 speed bikes, right? If you have a hybrid bike, you're going to be looking at 7 speeds or 8 speeds, right? So that's the number of cogs we have in the back. How many shifts can you make in the back? The teeth is how we measure our gear ratios. So the chain ring on the front of the bike may be a 50-34, right? So that means the outer ring has 50 teeth, the inner ring has 34 teeth. The rear cassette could be an 11 speed, so it might be an 1132. So there's 11 cogs there, ranging from 11 teeth to 32 teeth. So we hear this language a lot. Hopefully I'm going to help you understand at least what it means. Why does any of this matter? Determines how hard we work, pretty much. So the flat versus hilly terrain, this is where this gets helpful. If you watch things like Tour de France or whatever they're going to be talking about this, like, oh my God, look at that guy's chain rings. Right? Look at how big those things are. So you might hear some of that when you watch some of those bigger races. So if you do most of your riding in a place that is generally flat, it's probably best to opt for a narrow range cassette. So smaller jumps. You don't need big jumps if we're not climbing a lot of hills, right? So help with our cadence, help with our effort level, small little changes. If you live in an area with more varied terrain, which I think everyone on this call is in Connecticut, we live in varied terrain. We want a wider range cassette. So this can help with those hills. So the higher cog counts typically have the ratios more closely spaced. With higher cog counts typically have the ratios more closely spaced on the smaller cogs, and then they have bigger jumps in the bigger climbing cogs. So what all of that is saying is we're going to have more climbing gears and more descending gears is what it comes down to. We talked about stock bikes. They're usually good to go. Yeah, bike shops can help with this. So if you have a current bike and you're thinking about changing the cassette on it, it is important to consult someone. So when I did that change on my triathlon bike, I needed to get a long cage derailleur, so something that was a little bigger to accommodate all those gears with a new chain and so on and so forth. And I needed a longer chain, I needed a long cage derailleur, and I needed a new cassette. So it seems like, oh yeah, I just buy this thing and slap it on, but it's not always that simple. Sometimes you don't need a different derailleur, sometimes you do. So that's why it's best to go to a shop and plan ahead. And obviously each of those pieces costs some money, right? So it's not like just a cassette. Sometimes you also need a few other parts to make it all work. So just something to keep in mind if you are thinking about doing this. Okay. Questions, because I know that was a lot. All right. Bottom bracket and crank set. So the bottom bracket was, let me go back to the picture. The bottom bracket is this piece right in the middle of the cassette that the crank arms are attached to. So the bottom bracket of the bicycle connects the crankset to the bike and allows the crankset to rotate freely. The crankset or chain set, people use different words. So that part of your bike is what you pedal to move the bike forward. The crankset comprises of 2 crank arms, one on each side, and then the pedals are attached to that. And then we have the 1 to 3 chain rings up there. Bottom brackets, I didn't have a whole lot of experience about until the cyclocross season, when I went to go wash my bike one day, that day before, or 2 days before the race, and like the pedals were so stuck. I was like, oh God, I knew something was going on. So took it to the shop and my bearings were pretty much toasted. I saved them because if we ever do this in person, I can show you guys what the difference is. Pretty much they were all rusted out. So what happens is, like, during cyclocross season, when you're washing your bike, multiple times a week, you're always hosing from the side where like all the cassette and chain and stuff is. So all that water eventually just got in there, never completely dried out, and it just froze up my bearings on that side. My bearing on the other side was totally fine on the bottom bracket. I didn't need a new one, but just because of all the water blasting through it, completely froze up. So if your pedals ever feel a little stuck, it's most likely need some new bearings in that bottom bracket. And if you watch them remove the bottom bracket from your bicycle, it can induce anxiety because sometimes they just take this like mallet to it and they're like popping it out, and that's like very normal. But if you're like, my nice delicate bike, and they're like slamming this thing out. So it's an interesting experience, and they're not, don't worry, it's part of it. But if you've never seen it, you're like, you're gonna break my bike in half. Okay, Questions about bottom bracket or cassette? Here's another visual. Bottom bracket's in there, crankset, what our pedals attached to.
Is there a top bracket?
No,
Okay.
no, just the bottom bracket. It's kind of like this little hole through the whole bike, right? Like it's,
Okay. Yeah.
and they take it out and it's like this like circular piece. But it's usually the bearings on the bottom bracket that get toasted.
Thank you.
You're welcome. And none of my bikes I've had an issue with that until this cyclocross season. So I think it probably depends on, you know, I think a lot of those off-road bikes that we wash so much more often than like our road and triathlon bikes can have some more of these problems. And again, bearings are easy. Like I went there, luckily they had my size in stock. That's like the only nerve-wracking thing. It's like, it's very size specific. But they had my size and they had an extra one and I bought it. Again, it's like $13. And I'm like, I'd rather have this because cyclocross season, you race every weekend. It's really hard to like get parts in time. So, you know, some of this stuff, it's nice to have backups if you're riding or racing a lot. Any other questions? Okay. Yeah, so then the back of the bike here, again, we've got our cassette, which is where all that measuring comes in, our rear derailleur, these jockey wheels, or pulley wheels, as we like to call them. If you've done any of my bike washing stuff, these little guys get so dirty, very gunked up with stuff. So we just think of like, oh, I have to clean my chain and lube my chain. You need to get all the gunk off of these little guys. And there will be another one back here too that you can't, or right here that you can't see. So, but that's bike washing fun. All right. Pedals, all sorts of pedals. If you're buying a hybrid bike, it's going to come with some kind of flat pedals. If you're buying any kind of road bike, gravel bike, any of your higher end bikes, they're going to come with no pedals because most of us have our own version of clipless pedals we like. So there's a variety of type of pedals. These flat pedals we often call platform pedals. So if you don't want to clip in, this is what you use. And then mountain bikers use these too. This is definitely more of a mountain bikey style. You can see these little spike things here. Those help keep our foot in place. They just have a little more security than your basic like plastic platform pedal that a bike would come with. Then these are going to be the middle one is going to be our typical road pedal, or you might hear people call it like the triangle cleat. That's our classic road pedal. This is our classic mountain bike pedal. This one has a bit of a platform too, but this part in the middle is what we call the SPD, and that's like your typical mountain bike gravel clipless pedal. Flat pedals, obviously you can ride with any style of shoe. They do make specific like flat pedal shoes that have that stiffer sole. So our sneakers, if you took any kind of sneaker you wear, running shoe, whatever, there's some flex to them, you can bend them. Any kind of biking specific shoe, even if it's a platform pedal shoe, it's going to be very stiff on the bottom. So that's the difference. So again, a lot of people that mountain bike that have platform pedals will also have specific flat pedal shoes. Clipless pedals, you obviously need specific shoes with that. Pretty much the difference between road and mountain shoes. Road shoes are going to have the triangle cleat that you walk on. A mountain bike shoe is going to have a recessed cleat, so you're walking on the shoe, not necessarily the 2-bolt clip that comes with it. Because when we mountain bike and do off-road things, sometimes we have to walk. So that shoe helps us have some grip when walking, as if you've ever walked in a road shoe with a triangle cleat, you're like slipping and sliding all over the place or waddling around, right? It's not so fun. People get confused with the name of clipless pedals because you're clipping into something. It's like a little counterintuitive, but where that comes from is when toe clips were a thing way back when. Like the toe clips and the straps and all that kind of scary stuff that we think is very scary now. So when they came out with these pedals, they were clipless, But now to most of us, it's confusing because we have no idea what like toe clips are. And we're like, wait, we're like clicking into this thing. How is it clipless? So it's a little counterintuitive, but that's where it comes from. I'm going to do a talk next month about saddles and pedals more specifically. And I plan to talk about shoes a little bit in that too. So if you want more of a deeper dive into that, and there's all sorts of, this is like the basics, but there's all sorts of styles and stuff like that. So I'll get into it more at that talk, but this is kind of the starter of that. All right, questions? Okay. Saddles. So saddles are so fun. Said no one ever. Your bike comes with a saddle, usually a stock saddle, and usually many people don't enjoy the stock saddle. And then they're like, oh, what do I buy for a saddle? And they're like, oh, dear Lord, where do you even start? Right? It's such a complicated, frustrating process. If your body loves the stock saddle, you are the luckiest person in the world, and take that as your win of the day. Most of our bodies don't love the stock saddle. So then we go to try to purchase a new saddle. So first thing is we need to be fit for the saddle. The saddles come in different widths, and that's based on our sit bones. And it's important to get measured for this because the like, oh, you're skinny, which means you need the narrowest saddle, and oh, I'm larger, which means I need the largest saddle is false. It's based on your sit bones. It's not based on your weight or things like that. So it's important to get measured for the width of that. A good bike shop's going to have this little thing you sit on and measure it, so on and so forth. If you have a bike fitter, they will also look into some of this stuff. But if you go to buy a saddle, you're going to click it and there's going to be like 2, 3, 4 different numbers for a width, and you're going to be like, I don't know. So if you want to shop online, that's fine, but maybe go to your local bike shop to get measured first. Okay, so like I said, fitters can also do this, help you get a saddle, but that's usually encompassing more of like a detailed fit on your bike. So that's saddle fitting and widths. With saddles, we're gonna have we'll see all sorts of things. Some have cutouts, some don't. Some are gonna be our wider, more hybrid type saddle. Triathlon saddles are gonna look like the most insane thing you've ever seen. So a cutout tends to alleviate pressure in more sensitive areas. That's what it's designed for. As far as choosing what saddle you want is going to depend on what style of riding you do. So when we're riding a hybrid bike, we tend to be very upright, and something like this bottom left saddle, it's cushy, it's meant for me to be sitting more on my sit bones, and that's what's comfortable. If I put that saddle on my road bike, I'm not going to think it's very comfortable because of the position I'm in. So when we go buy saddles, it's very important to know like what style of riding you're doing to have the person help you, because people are going to look at this saddle and be like, oh, I want the widest, cushiest, comfiest saddle. And that's not always the case sometimes, right? I put this on my road bike, I'm going to be miserable because that's not how I sit on my seat on my road bike. Triathlon saddles look crazy because we don't sit on our sit bones in triathlon. We're sitting on our like pelvic bones essentially because we're rolled forward and we're laying down on the bar. So it's a totally different position. So these cutouts look insane, but with the way you're sitting, it makes sense. And triathlon saddles and some road saddles, right, are going to have, we call this like the nose of the saddle. They can have short nose, long nose, all sorts of things. Even when you get into the road saddles, you'll see some varying lengths of noses. Something like this saddle on the top right, there's no cutouts here. This is a saddle from Specialized. This is what I've put on all my bikes over the last like year and a half. It's working good enough for me right now. Remember I said saddles are like really complicated and frustrating? Here we are. But what Specialized did with this saddle, it's the Mimic technology is pretty cool with Specialized, but this is very female specific. And even though it doesn't have a cutout, which alleviates pressure, it's got all this cool technology under the nose in this middle part of the saddle to make things more comfy and alleviate some pressure. So there are companies doing cool, like woman specific stuff out there, which is always intriguing to me. And this saddle, like I said, has worked for me better than everything else so far. So, yeah, saddles are frustrating. It's a lot of trial and error. Most bike places are really good with return policies because they know you have to ride in it to see if this thing works for you. A lot of bike fitters will have saddles that you can like take and ride a bit before you purchase one, which is nice. Some bike shops do that. I can't think of one around here. If you go to one, let me know. But most of them have like a 30-day return policy. So you can take the thing, you can ride in it, you can see if you like it, if it's working out for you. So that's saddles. You need to get the width measured. And then the other thing, if things are, you know, you got your width measured, you got a saddle, you're wearing bike shorts, you're doing all the right things and it's still not comfortable, you might need a more in-depth fitting too. So the distance from like our saddle to the handlebars, how high our seat is, all that stuff, and I'm talking like millimeters of difference, really does matter and can change the ride for you. You'll never care more about millimeters of movement than when you're riding a bicycle. You're like, oh, that's nothing. And they move it this much. And you're like, oh my gosh, that changed everything. But that's saddles. Again, in the saddles and pedals talk next month, I'll go into a little more detail. And I'll share experiences of what I've tried and what's worked. And like, I open others to do the same. This is a really common question about saddles and what saddles work for people and what do people ride in. Again, we're all different, but if, you know, 10 people are riding in this one saddle, maybe it's worth trying, right? So yeah, it can be a very frustrating process, but you know, once we find something that works, it doesn't have to be so miserable when we ride. Okay. Longer than 30 minutes. But hopefully you guys got some good info. Does anyone have any questions?
I have a question
Yeah.
about bikes, sort of the difference between a hybrid bike and a gravel bike in terms of gearing and you know, what, like if you're doing long gravel around here where there's hills and all that, what is the difference like between, other than the drop bars? And like I know about the drop bars, and I don't have drop bars because I'm really short and I find them to be very scary. So I actually have a hybrid bike with flat bars. I'm just curious, like what is the other difference? Like, do the wheels, is there more gearing?
So depending on like what you have for a hybrid, right? So hybrids, their frame tends to be a little more upright, more comfortable, right? So when people are going to first purchase a bicycle because they want to ride the rail trail with their family, they're not racing or anything, they're going to go buy a hybrid bike, right? It's a little more comfortable frame. So that's one thing. Depending on what you're buying depends on, you know, what the tire clearance is and all that good stuff, if it has disc brakes or not. But as far as the gearing goes, usually if you're buying like some kind of stock hybrid bike, it's going to have a lot less gears. It's going to be like a 2x or 3x up front, and then it's going to have 7, 8, or 9 gears in the back.
That's what I have. I have like a Live Thrive bike, and that's pretty much what it is. It has disc brakes. But it's not high end.
Right? When you buy like a true gravel bike, you're gonna have a bigger gear ratio. It is depending on what you're buying for a gravel bike, because there's also like different frames for gravel bikes. But if we think of stereotypical gravel, like it's a little gnarly, we're going long, so the frame might be designed to be a little more comfortable than like an aero road bike per se. But just it kind of depends, right? Gravel is really booming right now, and there's like racy gravel bikes and there's like bike packing gravel bikes. And so now we're getting into like different frames of gravel bikes. But
Okay, yeah,
in general, gravel bikes you're still in drop down. It's still like a road bike position, but it may just be a little less aggressive if you're going a little longer on it.
okay.
Yeah, and so I think the biggest difference is like what it comes with for gearing.
Okay.
But then the thing is too, this when you have a 1 by gear, which is really common in higher end mountain bikes, gravel bikes, you only have one chainring up front, and you've got this like dinner plate of gears in the back. And so what the 1 by does, you have a big dinner plate in the back, and then you're like, well, maybe I don't have as many gears because I only have 12 in the back and not like the 24 options with the 2 by or something. But what the 1 by does is it eliminates all the crossover gears. So in theory, it's like a bit lighter, and then you don't have any gears that are doubling. So when you have 2 chain rings up front, there's some gears that are the same, right?
Yeah,
Depending on what ring you are and on the front and back, but there's some crossover. So it eliminates that with a 1 by.
Okay. And then the saddle, of course, is a big struggle that I'm dealing with too, like trying to figure out. And I was curious if you had been to Bicycles East and whether they have any saddles that they'll loan you, because I'm gonna go there.
No, I haven't been in there in a while. I just went to Cycling Concepts to buy another Specialized Power Mimic saddle for my gravel bike. They had it in stock, and I was like, I'll be there in 5 minutes.
That's one of the saddles I'm actually considering, but I thought I might just go visit, have the measurement done like you're saying, and then see,
what
to do, because it's definitely an issue for me. I'm sure it is for others too, but
yeah. And I know Bike East is a Trek dealer, so Trek has all of their products have a 30-day unconditional guarantee. So they want you to take it, ride in it, do stuff with it. And if it works, great. If it doesn't, bring it back. That's like very common. And even ordering online, like I kind of went through it with Tri-Saddles too, and you're buying and returning and buying and returning, and I didn't have any issues. I checked every website to make sure there is a return policy, but I must have wrote in 4 or 5 different models a year ago, and I returned with no issues. It's definitely more of a headache. You got to box it up and whatever, but triathlon saddles are a lot harder to find in stock at places than road saddles and hybrid saddles.
Okay.
All right. You're welcome. Any other questions? Okay. This is just a little graphic which I'll be launching tomorrow for our March events. So like I mentioned a few times, the Saddles and Pedals talk, I'm gonna go a little deeper dive into it. Try to tell you some more information. I'll share with you what I'm riding in. Doesn't mean it's like working for everyone and things I've tried. But sometimes people just want a starting point because it's complicated. And then, like I said, in that talk, I'll encourage people to share like what they're using too, and brands and types of pedals and shoes and things like that, because we all have things like we all have things, something we found a good deal on, whatever it is. So definitely we'll be encouraging people that come to that to please share. So I just wanted to highlight that one talk. Okay. So any questions about any of that? Any questions with Woman on Wheels, races, anything about our bikes? I'm here. We have questions.
When is the warm weather coming so we can ride outside more?
I know. It's been brutal. And I don't know how many of you like intensely follow me on social media, but I'm going to Oklahoma in, I don't know, a couple of weeks to do a 100-mile gravel ride. And you're like, oh my God, trying to train for this in New England is brutal. I like refuse to ride the trainer for 4 hours. Then you go outside, but then the trails are like trash and you're just like, it's very mentally taxing.
Yeah. Wow. Good luck with that. That'll be fun.
Well, thank you. It will be fun. It will be fun. So the other day, and I'm like trying to ride my new bike, and the trails are icy, and it's like sleeting on the road, and I'm just like, come on.
My husband and I did the CNO last summer.
Oh
uh,
yeah,
which was great. Like I highly recommend that.
Yeah.
And we rode right into DC, so it ended up being like 80 miles total, but it was epic. It was so beautiful. Like I can't say enough about that ride.
yeah, yeah.
Really
My
great.
brother did the Gap in the CNO.
Oh yeah.
I'm sure you had a lot more fun than he did. He did it in
Love
one
it.
go.
Yeah. Wow, that's a lot.
He did say it was cool. He like told my parents, he's like, you guys would love it. You can like make stops and stay. And he said it
Yeah.
was great.
Really neat. Yeah.
Yeah.
What does CNO stand for?
I know.
It's the what is the name of it? It's the towpath. I can't think of it the exact what the
Yeah,
C-
because they have
but
all
if you
these
Google it.
cool like little carriage houses or
Yeah,
whatever, like
it's
along
like
it.
the towpath that went from, it starts technically like in Pittsburgh, I think, but we
Yeah.
started in Harper's Ferry.
Yeah.
And then we rode to DC, but it's like where and it follows the rail now, because after the it's basically like a canal, if you will, waterway that ran that entire distance, and then the railroads were invented and they became obsolete. But the cool part about it is this path, it's still there, and you're riding along this canal the whole time. It's beautiful. And then there's all these stops along the way, these like houses, and some of them you can even stay in if you like bring stuff, if you want to do like bike packing. We ran into a bunch of bike packers.
Yeah. Yeah.
It's really cool. Like I and Harper's Ferry is amazing. Like we actually took our bikes, we drove to DC, and like we took our bikes on this train from DC out to Harper's Ferry, got there in the dark, and then stayed at a B&B that night with just like our bike clothes and like what we were going to wear with our water bottles and stuff for the next day, and then did the ride all the way back to DC the next day.
Yeah.
So you could do it like that. It was really fun.
Harper's Ferry is like a hub for athletes,
It's
like
so
hikers
cool.
and bikers and
Yeah,
yeah.
it's really neat. But
Yeah.
yeah, if
And
you
it's
Google
like-
it, you'll find information.
It's
on it.
kind of like the airline trail and the Hop River Trail though, right? Like the surface that you're riding
Yeah.
on.
Oh,
Yeah.
it was even nicer. I mean, it was
Yeah.
beautiful. It was so nice. There was not any water, mud, or anything. It was dry. It was amazing. It was
Yeah.
beautiful.
Yeah.
Sounds nice.
Yeah.
That's cool. All right. What other questions?
Thank you, Hunter.
You're welcome. Any other questions? Any other things that you guys like would love to know more about? Because what my ultimate goal is in all my spare time is
Yeah.
to like have a whole like just kind of like bank of classes like this. Like I did a couple in-person things at Trek about tires. I've done some bike cleaning stuff at my house. This one, we're gonna do the saddles and pedals. I want to do one about shifting. So like if there's any like concept or thing, my goal was to have them 30 minutes, but I talk too much. But like have these like shorter talks where we like dive deep into something. So if you guys ever have ideas, let me know. And if I don't know a lot about it, I can try to find someone that does that can help us.
This is
Well,
probably
definitely.
basic, and most people probably know this, but I'm still new to this.
You're good.
world Of like, because I started out, I'm a commuter. I ride from where I live down to New Haven, and that's how I started doing
Yeah.
that. And then I was like, well, I can ride this. Why don't I do a triathlon?
Exactly.
Nuts. But I think what I would like to know is like, obviously there is a difference of bikes, and like, but as a beginner, like, can I put gravel tires on my commuter bike and maybe go gravel riding with people? Cause like,
Yeah.
I've never done that. I would like to do that. I don't know what that
Yeah.
means.
Yeah.
But like, what are the major differences? And for somebody who's not going to go out and buy 5 different bikes, because as much as I would love that, I can't. Like, what are the, like, as a new rider who now is training for a triathlon, is it the saddle that's most important? Is it like, if you're new to this, what are the ins of just like how to, because I am uncomfortable the whole time, like whenever I know I'm training with the Mossman Triathlon Club. and it's uncomfortable the whole time.
Yeah,
So
yeah,
now that you're talking about saddles, I was like, well, maybe if I just get a different saddle, I
yeah.
might be more comfortable. But just like kind of like if you're starting, like what are the kind of ins of what it means and what are like
Yeah.
the things like, because like I have like platform pedals, I don't have
Yeah,
shoes,
yeah.
I have a pannier rack on the back of my
Right.
bike. It's currently sitting in a
I
trainer.
love it. I love
Yeah,
it.
like it's like I'm not gonna take that off because that's how I get to work
Yeah,
when
yeah,
it's
yeah.
snowing.
Yeah.
So, you know, like I think just kind of like these are really exciting, and I'm sure there are people who like know this, but like as someone who's just totally new to all of this, like the bike parts, I was like, that's exciting to me.
Yeah,
'Cause
yeah,
I
yeah.
don't know any of this.
Yeah, absolutely. Yeah. And that's like what I want with this. And honestly, people that have been riding a long time, and I'll even say myself, like I worked in a bike shop for years and years, and I like still call stuff bits and pieces, right? Like my guy friends that work on my bikes laugh at me, right? Like,
I think
because
it's like anything
it's
that you do.
hard.
Like I sail
Yeah.
and I don't call the things the right things
Yeah.
sometimes.
It's
And
hard and
it's
it's
a bob.
confusing.
It's, you know.
Yeah. And I think what I want for people is to be able, especially women, to be able to like go into a bike shop and be like, hey, I think my derailleur needs to be adjusted, right? I don't know how to do it, but I know my bike isn't shifting good, and I can confidently go in and say, hey, something's wrong with my derailleur, right? Or I can go in and say, hey, my pedals are stuck. Can you take a look at the bottom bracket, right? Or, you know, something feels weird with my brakes, right? Can you take a look at those? So that's what I want, because I think, again, especially women, so many times are like so afraid to go in, and then they're like embarrassed, and then it's like, this is what I want. I'm going and be like, this is what's up. But now to answer some of your questions, you can put gravel tires on different bikes, right? The main thing that you have to worry about is the clearance of your frame. So on the front of your bike, you have your fork, right? So that's only so wide. So like on my road bike, I can't go put a mountain bike tire in there because there's not space for it, right? I was using the example of my cyclocross bike, right? I've been riding that on gravel, but I'm making it very hard for myself because I don't have a lot of gears. I can only go with such a wide tire, so on and so forth. So even though that's like an off-road bike, it still has some like limits onto how wide stuff can be. So that's like where you're going to have your limits, right? If you have disc brakes, those tend to have a lot wider range than rim brakes. So what we're seeing a lot now is people have a road bike that they're doing road and gravel on, right? There's a lot of companies making bikes that this kind of like in-betweener, and people will have a road set of wheels and a gravel set of wheels, but those have disc brakes. So in that fork in the front, there's a little wider range. So I can put my skinny 25, 28 road tire on it, but I can also put like a 35 gravel tire on it. So like what I would say for you is, whether it's someone in the group or your local shop, go in and be like, hey, how wide can I fit a tire in here? So it's doable, and you don't necessarily need a second set of wheels, but it's like really annoying if you're using a bike for two things to like change tires. So that's why people usually have one bike with two sets of wheels. And you can get so one more thing, you can get gravel tires, like tires, again, another really complicated thing with treads and stuff, but you can get kind of like a mild gravel tire for when we're talking about things like the airline trail and stuff. That's a lot different surface than going to Vermont and doing a metric century. You're going to want something with a lot more grip than my like tire I really need for the airline trail. So, but if you want to join like our little gravel stuff, there's a wide range of that too, right? There's like our fun social rides on the rail trail that, you know, we can, if you got a couple little knobs on your tires, you'll be okay. And then there's Cretines bike packing trips that are like single track and adventurous. So,
and that's what I like, as I'm interested in those bike packing trips, but it's like, because I've bike packed before, but it's like, I don't know if my bike is going to be set for that. But because also my other question is this is the first time I'm using an indoor trainer.
Yeah.
And so like I noticed that like my tire is starting to get like that central rub
Yeah.
mark. When I go back outside, I'll need new tires, right?
So that's a great question. Yes, because if you go back outside, you have lost like any kind of grip that that tire has, and you're going to be in trouble, right?
Okay.
What you can do for next winter, well, this is tricky because you use that bike on the trainer and the road, right?
Yes, currently.
Okay. So then maybe not. Maybe you just buy a new tire every year. But for people that just like, nope, I only ride when it's 60 plus and sunny, and all winter my bike stays on the trainer, you can buy a trainer tire. So I have a bike that doesn't ever leave the trainer 365 days a year. That's her home. She stays there. And she just has a trainer tire on her, which is like this thick rubber tire, so it doesn't wear like your tire on the road would. But you can't ride the thick rubber thing outside either. It's like not going to go really well. But if you are like, nope, I ride my trainer from November to April, 100% get a trainer tire, because tires are not cheap. I don't know if
Yeah,
you bought tires recently, but they're expensive.
Well, and like the guy that his name is Clay. I don't know if any of you know him. He is a lovely human being, and I will say I was very nervous about kind of entering a triathlon club that is co-ed.
Yeah.
It's like, but excuse my language, no one seems to be an asshole, which I was very impressed
Yeah.
like in that kind of environment. But he didn't tell me. I just noticed it. I probably have. It's been like a month now of me training like kind of once or twice a week with them.
Yeah.
And I noticed the route and I was like, no one, I know I probably could have put it together in my brain, but like no one told me. And I was just like,
Yeah.
I feel like I'm going to need a new tire. And okay, I
Yeah.
might need to figure that out. Cause like it's a hand-me-down bike. It doesn't really fit me all that well. It's like, I don't have the money to buy a bike.
Yeah. Yeah.
I have the money to buy a tire, but now I will.
No, I have to, right? Yeah, and so for like the second part of your question with like the saddle and the comfort and things like that, right? It's so hard, but we can kind of like slowly check the boxes, right? Like getting, I think I've talked to you about this, like the good pair of like like a bib shorts, cycling shorts with a nice Sammy, right?
What I did buy at the gear swap, I will say, has helped.
Awesome. Yeah, yeah. So like something like that is a start, and like, you know, the more money you spend on this stuff, the comfier it is. Right? I'm not saying you have to go buy a $400 pair of bibs, but it's worth investing some money in like a nice pair, especially the longer and longer you go. So like shorts is one thing, right? Saddles is like kind of trial and error, right? Like talk to some people in your group, talk to us, right? See what people are riding in, and you just kind of have to start trying different stuff. Another thing you can do is chamois cream. So that's like
I someone in my group let me borrow theirs. And I was like, this is crazy how much this was. So it just arrived from Amazon.
Yeah. So like stuff like that is like really helpful, right? Yeah, there's all sorts of brands of that out there. You know, and fits are hard because like you know, you can like estimate, bye Chris, good seeing you. You can estimate, you know, like seat height and things like that, but it can also be like a very complicated, fine-tuned thing. Now, just starting out, sometimes like, you know, I ride on, you know, I go ride on the rail trail and I'm watching just like mom and dad out riding, and I'm like, oh dear Lord, put your seat up. Like, how is your back not in 95 pieces, right? So sometimes some people will see you ride and like, they're not being mean, by Karen. They're not being mean if they're like, you need to put your seat up. Like, we're trying to help you not be crippled.
my husband and I joke like, what is like, if you had a PSA that you would just announce to people, his would be raise your seat.
Yes. You're just like,
like with your knees are up here.
Yeah.
Raise your seat.
Yeah. And I'm like, if it's a kid, like, okay, fine. Maybe mom and dad don't want to buy a new bike every year because you can't stop growing. But when you see adults, you're just like, please, like, I know you're miserable. Like, I know you hurt. I spent $500 on a bike fit and I still have days I hurt, right? Like, I know you're in pain. Like, oh God, it's funny. So like there is like a fitting component too, right? Like if you have good shorts, you're using chamois cream, you find a saddle that's like the least painful of all the ones you tried, and like you're still really struggling, then like, and you can go, like there are bike fitters that do like saddle fits. They don't necessarily do like the full blown fit, right? Because then it gets into like the distance of the handlebars too, right? And that can get into different stems, right? Like it spirals out of control kind of fast. That's why I'm like, try all these other things first
Yeah.
before you get in. And again, if you get excited and you want to start doing longer and doing metric centuries and whatever, then like all this stuff is really important, right? If we're just trying to go do the 12-mile sprint triathlon, right, you can probably get through it even if it's a little uncomfortable, right?
Yeah. Yeah.
Um,
Okay. Thank
we
you.
want you to be comfy. It can be comfy, but again, if you're like, nope, next year my goal is to go do a century ride, and I'm going to be like, and you're going to go get a bike fit. So
Fair. Thank you.
you're welcome. Any other questions? Bye, Kim. Good seeing you.
You too.
All right.
I just wanted to say thank you very much. I'm new to cycling and
Yeah.
I'm in New Jersey, but my brother's in Connecticut. And
Oh,
he's-
cool.
And he's always telling me, come to Connecticut, I'll show you some hills, you know? So
Where,
I know. I
where in
love
New
when I
Jersey?
go to triathlons like outside of New England, and people will be like, oh my God, I'm nervous about the bike. It's so hilly. And I'm just like, you overhear people talking, and I like kind of chuckle. I'm like, yeah. You know, I go out for an hour ride and it's 1,000 feet of climbing. It's just like unavoidable.
Oh. But
But
I'm
Where-
very interested. This was wonderful, and I can't wait till the shifting too, because my brother keeps
Yes.
yelling at me because I'm doing it wrong. But
Yeah.
so-
No, I definitely like I said, I have all these ideas in my head. I just, you know, need a little time. So I'm like, if I slowly chip away at these things, then I'm gonna have a whole library of them and be a
oh,
little
it's
more
wonderful though.
readily accessible. But thank you for joining. I hope you got something out of it, Patricia.
Thank you very much.
Where in New Jersey are you?
I'm in Central Jersey. Like
I'm
Old
from
Bridge
Point
and-
Pleasant.
Oh, okay, that's further down. Yep. But,
Okay.
you know, we ride the trail and it's all flat. It's wonderful. No, so-
I know. It is hard because sometimes, like, you know, you just want to go out for a recovery ride, right? A little hour spin, and you're like, what's like the lesser of two evils of the routes I have here, right? Like,
No,
so,
I went one time on I don't know which trail, and we were New Hartford he lives by, or
Okay.
he used to. And I went with my ex-sister-in-law at the time. And I mean, she's flying, she does races and everything too. And she was flying down. I'm with my brakes. I'm like, oh my God, you know, so,
yeah,
and then-
yeah,
you know, definitely will help me if I get the shifting correctly, because
Yeah,
going
yeah.
up the hill is like I shouldn't be breathing so heavy, you know. So,
yeah. No, shifting is tricky, right? And there is some skill to it. And then I always say to people too, like, if you can, you know, join a group ride with someone or something, and sit behind someone that you know is a little more experienced in cycling, it's fun to watch like what they do. Like when they shift going up hills, is a big thing on the road. And then off-road, that's like a lot more complicated. You're shifting very frequently, but it's like, when are they shifting? How often are they shifting? How are they
Right.
shifting? Because sometimes it's like counterintuitive. We did a cyclocross race at Treehouse Brewing this year, and they had a flyover. So it's like you go up this ramp, it kind of flattens out, and then you go down this ramp.
oh,
And you think like, oh, this thing is so steep, I want to be in my easiest gear. But then you didn't have enough like oomph to get you up over. So you really needed to be like 2 or 3 gears down in the back to like get your oomph over it. So sometimes it like
wow.
doesn't always make sense as like how we think it should. Like,
That's interesting.
oh,
yeah. And a lot of us too, with like, we call it pedal, like when you're pedal and you're like mashing the gears, right? Like going up a hill, we're like, yeah, we're so strong. But that's kind of like the opposite of what we want to be doing. We want our legs to spin a little more.
right.
So like there is, some of it doesn't always make sense if you're like not a cyclist. You're like, this is kind of the opposite of what I think I should be doing. But yeah, we'll definitely at some point, hopefully this year,
Mhm.
have a shifting PowerPoint. But in the meantime, you know, ride with a buddy who's been doing it a little longer and watch them, because that's
He has me like pick a hill and keep practicing. You
Yeah.
know?
Yeah.
You know, so,
yeah,
Yeah.
for sure.
but this was
Well,
very
thank
good.
you. I have to hop. So
Yeah,
it was
thank
nice
you guys
seeing
so much
again.
for coming. Yeah, I'll
Thank you.
post this too on our little YouTube in case you want to rewatch it. So,
Wonderful.
Thank you.
Wonderful.
all right, have a great night, guys.
Thank you.
Bye.